So, welcome to the consciousness lecture, everyone. Today we'll be covering what is consciousness and what are the main theories of consciousness. So, you're probably all familiar with the quote, "I think, therefore I am," by the famous French philosopher Rene Descartes. So, Descartes went on to explain we cannot doubt our existence while we doubt. So, what did Descartes actually mean by this? Because we're reliant on our five senses in order to observe the world around us, we cannot prove that reality exists outside of our experience of it. We can touch the table in front of us and feel that it is solid. You can hear my voice and note whether it's loud or soft, so it seems real. But at the end of the day, we are trusting our senses, and these senses are subjective. So we can't prove reality exists objectively because we're relying on our subjective senses. Our subjective experience is what we have to work with, though. So we do have to trust in our ability to perceive reality accurately using our senses. But for all we know, we might actually be stuck in some matrix-like simulated reality, or perhaps the world around us is really just a dream. And Descartes would argue that that's true. There's no way to know for sure that this is not all an illusion. What we can know is that we are experiencing something. So I might be able to convince you that perhaps we are in fact trapped in the matrix or a dream, but I wouldn't be able to convince you that you don't exist. And the reason is that you have a perception of your existence. So you have an awareness that you are sitting here experiencing something. So a more complete representation of Descartes' quote would be, "I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am." That is, the fact that you are able to sit here and doubt reality and you are aware of this thought means you must exist. So if you are able to consciously doubt your existence, you must exist. So this is the idea of consciousness. So William James came along and built on this idea. He said that part of being conscious of a thought is a simultaneous awareness of oneself as the owner of that thought. So James described consciousness as a moving stream of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. And this is one definition of consciousness. The awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, as well as an awareness of ourselves as the owner of these experiences. What this is getting at is a kind of meta-awareness. So you aren't just aware of the sound of my voice or the brightness of the computer screen. You're able to observe yourself listening to and watching this lecture, and you're aware of yourself existing as an entity experiencing these things. So if at this point you're finding all of this a little vague and difficult to get your head around, you'd be right. These are tough philosophical questions. So this ties into David Chalmers' ideas about the hard and easy questions of consciousness. So what I've just spoken about in terms of this subjective experience of the world around us and of our own experiences is what Chalmers would refer to as the hard questions of consciousness. When we think and perceive, there is a whir of information processing, but there is also a subjective aspect. That is, there is something it is like to be a conscious organism. This subjective aspect is experience. So, for example, we can explain scientifically how the eye works with the brain to see colour, but we can't explain what it is like to see the colour red. We can't show scientifically that you see the colour red in the same way that I see the colour red. There's no way to know for sure that my voice sounds the same to you as it does to someone else. So these are questions that can't be tapped into by science, and we may never be able to actually resolve these questions. So what we're interested in psychology are what Chalmers would call the easy questions of consciousness. So this includes questions seeking to explain things like the ability to discriminate, categorize, and react to environmental stimuli, the integration of information by a cognitive system, the focus of attention, the deliberate control of behaviour, and so on. So these are things we can measure scientifically. When we say these are easy questions of consciousness, we don't necessarily mean they are easy to answer. So some of these are quite complex questions that might actually take years and years to answer. But what we mean is they are questions we can investigate and at some stage resolve scientifically. So they're easy in comparison to the hard philosophical questions of experience that we can't address scientifically. So easy questions are those that we can look at in the lab. So we can define consciousness as the subjective awareness of mental events. This includes following one's own thought processes. So notice that it is not the thought process itself, but the awareness that you are thinking. It's an awareness of our own unique emotional experience. And not only am I happy, but I know that I'm happy. We can use consciousness to describe different levels of awareness. And these levels can be seen along a continuum of being acutely aware and alert right down to being totally unresponsive. So we can look at consciousness along a continuum, as I said, from fully aware and attentive, such as during activities requiring controlled processes at the top here, to being totally unconscious at the bottom of the table. So controlled processes are those that require our full awareness. This kind of controlled attention usually interferes with the execution of other ongoing activities. So for example, if you've ever tried to type, say, a lengthy text message whilst in the middle of a conversation with someone else, you'd notice that the text will actually interfere with your ability to carry on the conversation. So you start to drift off and answer absent-mindedly, or you might start typing what you're actually saying. So these processes interfere with each other. Now we can move down the continuum to fairly automatic processes that don't require much attention, such as walking. So I can easily conduct a conversation at the same time as walking because walking is fairly automatic. So I don't have to think about or focus on putting one foot in front of the other to walk. I don't have to think about that. So it doesn't interfere with my ability to talk to the person walking next to me. So some things might begin as controlled processes and become automatic processes. For example, when we learn to drive a car, driving requires our full attention. We have to consciously think about keeping the car straight and staying between the lines, when to brake, when to press the clutch. And this gradually becomes an automatic process. So eventually we accelerate and brake to keep the car straight pretty automatically. We've got no trouble listening to a talk show on the radio or following directions on our GPS at the same time. So we're still aware we're driving. It's not happening, without our knowledge, but we don't have to consciously think about every step or movement involved. Moving down, daydreaming is an activity that requires a low level of awareness. So it often occurs during automatic processes. It involves fantasizing or dreaming while you're awake. So you might be daydreaming, say, on the way to the bus stop, thinking about what you're going to buy when you win the lotto, or visualizing how the conversation you're going to have with your partner later is going to go. And you arrive at the bus stop and realize you have no real memory of the walk. Walking is so automatic that you're able to actually tune out and daydream, and you walk all the way there and still arrive at your destination with no problem. So altered states of consciousness and sleep states we cover a little bit later in this module. But we do need to make the distinction between the unconscious mind and being unconscious, so the two just at the bottom of the table. Now we cover Freud in more detail during the module on personality, but briefly, Freud came up with the idea of the unconscious mind. So he theorized this to be a part of our mind sealed off from voluntary recall and containing hidden wishes or desires that we might find threatening or unacceptable. So these are things we're suppressing. You might have had a traumatic experience, or perhaps you have some desires that are socially unacceptable. And these memories and desires are suppressed into the unconscious mind. So they still continue to influence our behavior, but we aren't consciously aware of them. And this is different to being unconscious as a result of being knocked out by a blow to the head, for example. This is a state of total unawareness and a complete lack of responsiveness to the environment. So what are the main theories of consciousness? Well, to date, there's not enough evidence to provide one universal theory of consciousness. So there's numerous alternative explanations. There's a lot of different theories of consciousness out there. So, historically, there's been the idea of the soul, and there's actually a few pretty out there ideas to explain what consciousness might be. But today we'll just focus on a few of the more scientifically verifiable ideas. So Freud proposed 3 levels of conscious processing: the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the unconscious. So the conscious is the things you are aware of at any given moment. The pre-conscious refers to things which are not presently conscious, but which could easily be brought into conscious awareness if needed. So for example, if I asked you to recall your address, this was not in your conscious mind before I mentioned it, but you are able to easily retrieve the information and bring it into your conscious awareness. And the unconscious, which I mentioned earlier, which are wishes or feelings which we are unable to bring into awareness because they're too traumatic, for example, but they still influence our behavior. So in contrast, the unconscious in cognitive research refers to information processing mechanisms that operate outside of awareness, such as implicit memory, rather than things we're motivated to suppress because we're unable to deal with being consciously aware of them. So where Freud would say the unconscious is made up of things that are too traumatic to bring into consciousness, cognitive psychologists argue that the unconscious is simply things that we're not paying attention to. So cognitive psychologists see the brain as an information processing center. So the brain's like a big computer. And for them, what's important in consciousness is questions of attention. So attention refers to the focusing of conscious awareness, providing heightened sensitivity to a limited range of experience requiring more extensive information processing. So if you think about, say, typing up an assignment on your computer, you might have Microsoft Word open, but in the background, there'll be other processes operating, such as your antivirus software scanning for bugs and your clock keeping the time. So these background processes are like your unconscious, and your conscious is like the Word document which is open on your screen. So there's a lot of different ways that cognitive psychologists actually study attention and conscious and unconscious awareness. So one of the ways that cognitive psychologists investigate attention is using dichotic listening tasks. So these are tasks where participants are asked to attend to information received through one ear while ignoring information received in the other ear. So the task is used to study divided attention or multitasking. Divided attention refers to splitting attention between two complex tasks. So earlier I gave the example of trying to send a long text message while maintaining a conversation with someone else. So this is an example of divided attention. So your mind has limited resources to devote to performing tasks. So it's constantly making decisions about which task or stimulus to prioritize in terms of how much attention is devoted to it. So in these dichotic listening tasks, you have information coming in through the left ear, for example, a shopping list, and information coming through the right ear, for example, a poem about the English countryside or something like that. So the experimenter instructs you to focus only on the information coming through the left ear. So you just focus on the shopping list, and at the end of the task, the experimenter will ask you to repeat back the information that was coming in through the left ear. And what you find is people generally have no trouble doing this, so they repeat the shopping list back easily. Then the experimenter will ask you what information was coming in through the right ear, and the participant will generally say, I've got no idea, I can't remember. So you weren't paying attention to this information. You have no idea it was a poem about the English countryside. However, if the participant is asked, for example, to name a city, they're more likely to say London than any other city. So dichotic listening tasks are one way to demonstrate that an individual's mind is often unconsciously processing information that they're not consciously aware of. So even though you weren't aware of it, your brain was still actually processing this information. Now, another way cognitive psychologists study attention is using tasks such as the Stroop color naming task, which we'll cover next in this module.